Welcome to the Lightforge podcast. This is Adwicta.
This is Merps. Hello. We missed a week. I was out last week. Stuff did happen, and stuff continued to happen. So we got actually quite a bit to talk about. Some changes to
Lots
the
of
meta.
stuff. Lots of stuff
Yeah.
happening. So the Maw and Disorder meta is here. And we will talk about that. But the most important thing to know about Maw and Disorder meta, besides the rotation and what cards are in it now, is that the offer rates for murder went up. Normally, when a mini set launches, they take away the offering bonus for the existing main set. So you would expect murder's offering rates to go down by, I don't know, about 25%, 33%, whatever the old offering bonus is, it would go down. That did not happen. Instead, it went up. Now, I don't think they specifically added another bonus to it. I think it's just the fact that they added that the sets that they added had fewer cards and whatever, and so all the offering rates of quote unquote existing sets went up. But that would just be core and murder because they shuffled everything else around. So if you were expecting, like we were, that the murder offering rates are going to go down a bit and things are going to be, you know, the ridiculous cards from murder are not going to be as ridiculous in the new set, that didn't happen. Instead, we get more murder. So that's why you're seeing a lot of murder.
Well, you're seeing a lot of murder. What do you want to talk about first? Like the classes or the changes, like the recent patch?
I guess we should start with the meta because okay, so here's what happened, right? They dropped the game on Tuesday, and then they dropped the patch the Thursday after that. So that's like a under 10-day turnaround. It's not the fastest, but it's all right. And the meta wasn't like super terrible before that from the perspective of class balance, right? Like Paladin started off at like 45%, now it's at like 43% maybe. So they made some adjustments. But the big picture is that the meta has basically not changed from launch. Because they did do an update, but it was a very small and targeted update.
Yeah, look, some classes have definitely changed a little bit. Let's just go to HS Replay and tell you guys what the meta is right now in terms of class win rate. The top class right now is Paladin at 53.6%. Once again, we're recording this Sunday night. The bottom class is Sad Warrior at 41.1%. So it's a 12% differential. But really, it is just Druid and Warriors at the very bottom, suffering at 41%. Hunter is at a bad but salvageable 45.3%. During earlier this week, I actually had a good aggro run. We got 10 wins out of it, and it was okay. We just ran into some paladins, or really just one paladin at the end that beat us, which is understandable. Paladins have tons of tools, the card quality is there, but the top is pretty loaded. Like if you get any of the top, I would say like 5, 6 classes, Paladin, Warlock, Demon Hunter, Shaman, Mage, and Priest are within 4% of each other.
Mm-hmm.
This is a pretty healthy top of the meta. And then Rogue and Hunter are like 46, 45%. And if you get like Druid, Warrior, you're pretty sad because those win rates are really sad. But if you just look at, hey, out of 10 classes, 6 of them are like very competitive with each other. That's not bad. Although, if you talk to some people, it is how the games play out, which continue to frustrate people.
Continue to frustrate. The games are more terrible now than they have ever been. I think this is the worst meta that we have seen in almost a year. Definitely the worst since Matt London has taken over the balancing, and worse since Alteric. That's really when the big the power creep came in the cards, and it kind of unbalanced everything and shifted everything to be not just like swingy, which we were used to before, but like super swingy where nothing you do matters. And when that first hit, that was a super terrible meta. But through some luck and some balancing, it got progressively better and better. You know, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 1 step back. But it's been getting better. And the previous meta in Murder was actually quite okay. It was the mix of the tempo delaying and what we call tempo possible decks with Skullamances, lots of cards for everybody, like you don't have to have good cards to have a lot of cards, meant that there was a lot of space to be playing the game. All of that is gone now. The new rotation has worse cards than the previous rotation. Now remember, the big worry from the previous rotation was that there weren't going to be enough good cards to compete with Murder. And we were almost certain in all of our reviews and all of our whatever, we were all making the prediction that they were going to add at least one of the two standard sets. At least one of the two sets from this year, and then at least another standard set back in to this rotation. And that would create a more healthy back and forth kind of meta because your power levels are going to be more towards the new power level and less towards the old power level. You can never have an old power level wild rotation anymore because you always have to have the new set, and the new set will always be at the new power level. So rather than making things better, and the previous meta turned out okay, so maybe they were like, hey, maybe we can do wild rotations. Well, you can't. You can't because this problem is going to rear its head way more often than not. Like, the last meta was an exception, where they designed something with the tempo changes between the corrupt mechanic and this infused mechanic, and it all worked out so that things were fine-ish. Things are not fine-ish right now. You have cards that don't do anything, very little initiative in the game, very little tempo swings from not super powerful cards. So you have your infused cards were never great, right? Like that was the whole complaint about Murder, was that the neutral cards are really not like chart toppers. Well, they continue to be not that great. You continue to have issues where now the corrupt mechanics aren't in the game anymore either. So you're losing one more form of tempo swing. And the cards that you're adding back, what are the sets? It's like Ungoro and like it's like super old sets, all of them. Some of the Lackey sets are back, which Lackeys were great when they first came out, but they're like super inconsistent and very RNG and swingy. And even the Lackey cards are now no longer like top of the game because they were from like 4 years ago. It's the time has moved past where they are actually like super premium cards. They're just good cards now. They're just good cards with a lot of RNG, and that is terrible. That's actually the worst kind of card that you can make in this game. Because if you make a busted card and then add a lot of RNG to it, it doesn't really matter. Because when your opponents play it, all that means is they're almost certainly going to win. Or if they, if they have bad RNG, they're going to win. If they have good RNG, they're going to totally crush you in one turn. Like, who cares? You've lost already anyway, right? Like, that RNG didn't really even matter that much. But when you have the RNG on a good card, it's like if they have good RNG, they win the game flat out. If they have bad RNG, they lose the game flat out. Like, that's bad. That's really, really bad. And that's what those cards fall into right now. So you just have all of these cards that do nothing and cards that do stuff, but relying heavily on RNG. And also a lot of the Murder cards fall into this category as well, which is why Murder was such a controversial set. And the Maw and Disorder set really doubled down on that. So all the new cards coming in are also in that category of like, these aren't really particularly great cards. They're just good cards or okay cards. But if you RNG it up, or if you have the most synergistic deck ever, they're actually absurd S++ play tier cards. Or, in Murder's case, if you guess right, or rather, sorry, if your opponent guesses wrong, then they're the most absurd cards. Like, these are it's a terrible, terrible meta. And you feel so helpless. Like, there are some people who thought the previous meta was bad. There are. They exist. Like, really bad. If the previous meta...
One or two people who think that.
Okay.
Yes, I might know of one or two people.
But,
yes.
But, like, what do they think of this meta? This meta's like 10 times more horrible than the previous meta for the exact same reasons the previous meta was bad. Like, if you had a problem with a previous meta, it's not like this meta gave you different problems, like, right? Like, exchanged some problems for other problems. It just doubled down on all the pre-existing problems. And then removed some of the stuff that was mitigating the pre-existing problems. Like, this is so bad.
I think now is a good time to talk about the patch that came out earlier this week, right? On Thursday, and talk about what it did, what it might have aimed to do, and what it actually changed. They had BG changes. I'm not going to talk about BGs. We're not talking about BGs right now. We're talking about Arena. First of all, they made some bad legendaries no longer draftable. Chef Nomi, Spirit Singer, Umbra, Megtheridon, Osrook, Vorax. There's a lot of them. You might not even know the stats. I don't remember the stats to all of them. They're just bad. What they did that might make you guys happier is Sire Denathrius, Ysera the Dreamer, Alexstrasza the Lifebinder, and Deathwing the Destroyer now appears less frequently in all drafts.
Okay, so for the record,
Yeah.
Alexstrasza has a win rate of like a normal good card. Like it's not one of the super good cards for legendaries. And Deathwing has a win rate of Fireplume Phoenix. These are
If you
not.
guys, yeah, if you guys have played in this meta, how many times when you discover a dragon are you like, I guess I'll settle
Yeah.
for a Deathwing. I guess I'll settle for an Alexstrasza. Those aren't the hits that you want, right? Those aren't like the big hits that you want. Like Ysera is good. Like Ysera, for all of the memeing that Adwokta does about
It's
it,
not.
I
It's
will
not a
say,
memeing. Ysera is good for average players, and they balance the game for average players. I have never said Ysera is bad for average players. So,
okay.
and I really like that they reduced the offering rate of Ysera. I hate facing a Ysera, like because it just removes my opponent's skill, and I want to beat my opponent's skill.
So here's the thing. I think with Deathwing especially, how many times have you guys picked Deathwing because it is the best pick, and then for quite a few turns, you obviously can't play it before turn 10, and then turn 10 comes, you're like, okay, I can't play it this turn, or it's not good to play it this turn, not good to play it this turn. It's risky to play it this turn. I can't play it this turn.
Yep.
It's and that means it's just not a very good card, right? That's the definition of not a very good card. Where kind of like I would play Stoneborn General more freely, more often than I would a Deathwing, right? That's kind of weird, but yeah, that's sort of how it's working out nowadays. So that's what they did for those cards. Additionally, certain neutral cards will
Okay.
now appear less frequently in classes they have low synergy.
Let's not go there yet. I have more to say about these legendary nerfs. So we were talking. Okay, so they nerfed Alex, they nerfed Deathwing, right? So they're not going by win rates. If they went by win rates, they would have nerfed a bunch of other cards and probably not nerfed Deathwing and questionably nerfed Alex. But the reason behind nerfing Deathwing and Alex and not the other cards, so some of the cards that are significantly higher in win rates, I'll give two examples. One is Runethak and one is Talon. Runethak buffs your hand, and it costs 5 mana and buffs your hand and deals like 3 damage on the board, and then probably gets removed. Still very good, but you can see the effect is subtler. Talon draws the highest card in your deck after being what really should be these days like a normal 4 mana card, and it is instead like 5 mana, and so it draws a card, but it's drawing your biggest or best card. So it actually has a pretty high, like a very high win rate. But again, subtle. These are not the big swings. On the other hand, Deathwing is a gigantic swing. Alex is 8 damage to the face potentially. Alex is a huge swing. It may not be the best card, you may not be able to use it very freely, but when you can use it, it is a big swing. And it is a swing that is kind of out of the ordinary, right? Like, you're not prepared for an Alex. You're not prepared for it. And this is why Baron kind of gets a pass, I think. Because you're always kind of prepared for a Baron. Almost all the classes can deal 2 damage to everything. But 8 damage to your face, very few classes can do that. You're very prepared for that. Not really. Deathwing, blow everything up in the board. Maybe a third of the classes can do that. So they're really watching out. Like, I like this decision making, right? Where they're removing stuff not just based on win rate, but they're removing the ones that, I mean, they probably look at it as these feel the worst, but in reality, they feel the worst because they cause the biggest swings and they upset all of your expectations. And so that's very good. Like, if you're a good player, you're going to get beat by Deathwing and Alex more than Runethak and Talon. Just because the RNG will roll that way. So this is very good. And they got rid of Ysera and Sire. Those are like 2 of the top cards. They did not get rid of they did not nerf down Sylvanas. even though that is the highest win rate card now, as I think we all predicted, and we are all right. But it's a new card. I guess they didn't want to they didn't want to knock it down just yet. But Sylvanas is ridiculous. Okay, that's my 2 cents on the legendary changes.
Okay, that sounds good. So certain neutral cards will now appear less frequently in classes they have low synergy with. Um, that makes sense. I don't, they didn't list exactly which ones were.
Yeah, it's like weapon synergies, secret synergies, that
Yeah,
kind of stuff.
yeah. Weapon synergies are a lot of them. Card offering adjustments were made to make overperforming cards in Demon Hunter, Hunter, Mage, Paladin, and Warlock appear less frequently. Yeah. And several card offering adjustments were made to give Druid and Warrior better average draft offerings.
Yes.
This happened on Thursday.
Yeah, and so the win rates are all updated now, pretty much. It'll still move a little in that direction, but the bottom line is it did not nerf things too hard for any of the classes, and it did not buff Druid and Warrior too much. Druid and Warrior are still by far the 2 worst classes by win rate, and that's not going to change. Paladin is still the best class on the win rate. That may change, but it'll still be one of the top ones. The big thing that happened with Paladin is Buffet Biggin, which people complain about a lot. I have never had a problem with Buffet Biggin. I mean, I have a problem in that it's a ridiculously powerful card and we should ban it. So I guess I do have a problem with it. But I did not have a special problem with it. Whereas some people, most people, I think, actually, seem to have a special problem with it. They're like putting this.
Hit by it?
Yeah, I get hit by it all the time. I win all the time when I get hit by it. I win like 75% of my games where they Buffet Biggin on or near curve.
What kind of decks do you have?
Decks that can handle stuff like that, I guess. It's just not like it's a bunch of stats, right? And you can deal with a bunch of stats in. Sorry, I will preface this to say I'm talking about the prior meta, not necessarily this meta. I've been hit by Buffet Biggin once this meta, and I lost. That's it. That's my entire experience with my opponents playing Buffet Biggin on me this meta. But the previous meta, the murder meta, I got hit by Buffet Biggins all the time, just like everybody else, and we were good most of the time, the vast majority of the time. Anyway, my point is that it is nerfed like 50% win rate, not win offering rate. It has dropped like a freaking rock, and presumably that's what they did to a lot of the other cards. I didn't go down the list and look at all the top performing cards on HS Replay and see which exactly one of them are hit and how many of them are hit. But Buffet Biggin was the big one. So you guys who are very sad about Buffet or very sad when facing Buffet Biggin, that is now less of a concern. I care much more about like Deathborn. Like Deathborn kills me almost every time. Like if my opponent plays a Deathborn, I win like less than 1/8 of the time. But Buffet Biggin, I win 75% of the time. They nerfed Deathborn too, of course, but seems like by not as much as Buffet Biggin, maybe by 25% instead of 50%. But they had already nerfed Deathborn before that, right? So in total, Deathborn's probably nerfed by 50% now instead of their small nerf before. They have enlarged it to the 50% that they're nerfing Buffet Biggin at.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Anyway, that's all good, right? Like, I don't want to get too bogged down in the fine details of like, do I think Buffet Biggin is the biggest problem in this meta, or like the 10th biggest problem? It's a problem in the meta, and they're addressing it. That's what matters.
Okay. So yes. Now we can kind of talk about, they are definitely trying to address something, right? This is once again Matt London and team, like trying to do something about a meta in which, the last meta, a decent amount of people complained about it. Let's talk about why what they did was not enough. We appreciate the effort, but I think right now it's not enough. You know what this reminds me of right now, actually? We're not going to talk about BGs or Battlegrounds, but I think we're at a point right now. It really does remind me of BGs, in which for quite a while, if you remember, BGs at the very beginning was made from Hearthstone cards, like normal cards. We had Menagerie Magician, remember? Yep. We had Menagerie Magician, and some cards stuck, right? For example, Rockpool Hunter, that was one. that stuck for a while. It wasn't changed like Menagerie Magician. And it feels like at a certain point, the devs, obviously with BGs, were like, okay, everything has to be new, right? We also had Shredder, and Shredder made absolutely no sense in BGs because you're like,
We had
wait, what's a
Shredder for the
drop?
longest time. It was like a year or something.
Right. And then you also had stuff like, if you guys remember, this is the OG BG players, piloted Sky Golems dropping 4 drops, which, Gentle Megasaur was a 4 drop, but it was a tier 6 unit. And people, if you didn't play Hearthstone Constructed or Arena, you'd be like, what the heck is this? And it just made this like awkward situation in which stuff didn't make sense. The power differential, the fairness of it just didn't feel right. And then they shifted. They're like, okay, we can't do this. That's sort of where we are with Arena right now, in which you just can't do enough. Like the devs realize we can't use normal Hearthstone cards for BGs. It's just not possible. And this structure that they have for Arena, in which they bring back old sets, they mix and match. It's like you are trying to build the Lego Millennium Falcon with like 10,000 pieces when you only have 10 pieces. Like you just can't do enough. You're like, well, if I rotate this a little bit, it looks more like a Millennium Falcon. It's like, yeah, sure, but you just don't have enough pieces. Like that's the problem. It'll always be awkward. It'll always be significantly misfit. I think with quite a few of the metas we've seen recently, misfit, ill balanced, kind of, not for lack of effort from the team, right? Like they try things, that they do things, and they try to do things pretty subtly too, which we appreciate. But we can't keep doing this. Like whether it's a curated list, whatever we do, it has to be different than we bring back GVG.
Yeah.
Also, we have Giga Power set from 2023. But look, we have Snow Chugger. It's like you guys like Snow Chugger, right?
And card.
We can't do this. That is like the real problem here.
The like power level wise, you gotta, the sets that worked, right, are the sets that are very curated so that all the sets synergize really, really nicely, and there is one new set, and that's it, right? That was the previous meta, and I think that may have been a one-off outlier. And some people don't even like the previous meta, even though I thought it was one of the best metas we've had in years. And the ones that worked before that, more or less, are the ones with the super powerful cards, because we have plenty of those sets, and they're at the standard meta, or the standard meta, but with like one wild, main set thrown in for like flavor or whatever, right? That you'll end up with like 1 or 2 cards in your deck with. But when you put a lot of the wild sets in, you're going to have a lot of the wild cards in your deck by default. And that doesn't work. You cannot do this. This is going to like when I played the meta for the first time on launch day, the Maw and Disorder meta on Tuesday, I said to chat immediately, I was like, look, I don't care what the balancing team does to this. They cannot fix this meta. This meta will be trash until they do a rotation. There is literally nothing they can do about it. So when they announced the changes, I'm like, okay, fine. It will make it 5% better. Like, imagine if you have a score that you're giving in your head of how good metas are, and like the best historical meta was 1000 and the worst historical meta was like 100, right? And like, let's say this meta starts at like a 200 or a 300 or whatever. The problem isn't just that the meta's starting at a 2 or 300. It's just that no matter what they do, they can only give it an extra like 5% better, 10% better, 25% better. And you're still going to have a shit meta. Like, shit meta plus 25% better is still shit meta. This isn't one of those things where like, oh, we just need the balance team to step it up. Like some of the previous metas, especially in like the past year, or 2 years really, are like, hey, if the balance team were on top of it and did it balancing quickly and figured out the right things to do, this meta could be a 500 or a 600 or a 700. But instead it's a 2 or 300 because we're not getting good balancing. This isn't like that. Those are metas in which you can double or triple how good the meta is score-wise. Like in your, like, I don't know, judgment. But you just don't have the base for it. The pool of cards that is in this meta doesn't allow for the meta to possibly be even okay. It will always suck. And beyond sucking, like I'm gonna move one step beyond the meta sucking, as in like it kind of doesn't matter what you do because it's just about whether your opponents have a card or not, and whether they draw the card or not. The bigger point of sucking is that this meta is also terribly boring and unfun. Even when your opponents don't draw those cards, because you have two options, right? Your opponents draw those cards and have those cards, and then you lose, and it doesn't matter what you do. Or you have those cards and you draw them, and your opponents don't, and then you win no matter what you do. And very, very rarely, and even rarer now that they nerf those cards offering rate, will you both have those cards and be able to go back and forth with them, right? When you have a standard rotation, more or less, you're going back and forth with those overpowered cards a lot. There's a lot of dynamicness happening. And as long as you don't die, you're still in it, right? Because they flip the board, you flip the board. Like, you may not like that kind of style, but at least it is interactive. We're now in a meta where it's like the classic meta, except rather than losing 5% of the time because your opponents drew something totally ridiculous that you couldn't handle, or maybe 10%. Now, like, I don't know, 40-50% of games are decided like that. But when you're not dealing with that, you're still playing like my Yeti hits your Yeti. Like, that's what this meta is. My Yeti hitting your Yeti. There has been no meta that was more my Yeti hitting your Yeti than this current meta. Like, in the last 4 years. It's crazy how bad this meta is when you don't draw.
Meta, you mean the last meta, or?
I mean like the Maw meta, right? I don't necessarily mean the post adjustment meta, but the post adjustment meta will make it worse, not better.
Okay, right?
Yeah. Because it'll make it more boring because they're nerfing down the offering rates of all the ridiculous cards, which is great for letting skill matter and tamping down the swing and whatever. But it does make it even more boring. Like, I'm trying to think of stuff that I did in all the games that I played in this meta, and the vast majority of times it's just play a minion or a removal and then bump another minion into another minion or go face. There's not a lot going on here. Like, there's not a lot of big level strategy that you could do in the previous meta with tempo. There's like a little bit of it, but it doesn't make any discernible impact. And there's not like big combos that you really set up because you don't have enough of those cards to for the mix. And there's not a lot of your big swing cards are just like, oh, do I have a biggin? Guess I do. Guess I play it. Do I have a Deathborn? I guess let's wait until they set up a board for me inevitably, and then I play the card, I win the game. And if I don't have it, I guess I can't do that, and instead I will bump my Yeti into your Yeti. Like, I don't know. This is... And I love bumping Yetis. Bumping Yetis into Yetis is one of my favorite activities, but I don't like bumping Yetis into Yetis if half the time it don't matter. Like, that just feels like a lot of work for nothing. Like, the percentage of games that don't matter is so high right now. I guess it's lower now after the patch. Like, I've only played 2 runs after the patch, and it was in the early part of the patch too. It was on Friday night, so not even all the decks were post patch decks. So maybe now it's more of a super classic Yetis bumping Yetis with a lot less of the whatever crazy cards going around. But I think there's still going to be too many crazy cards because they nerfed the crazy cards down by 50%, and they covered half the crazy cards. So altogether, you're going to see 25% less craziness, and that gets diluted down the farther up you go in terms of your win rate. So when you get to your 7-win matches, you're still going to see not 25% less crazy cards, but probably 10% less crazy cards or something.
All right. Yeah. So that's sort of where we're at. It's fortunate that we got to change this quickly. What's unfortunate is I think you can sense from what we are saying, we don't think it is enough in terms of not really just balancing the classes, because look, if you just say, the top 6 classes are within 3-4 percentages of each other,
yeah,
that's pretty good. It's just how these games play out, right? They play out in a way that I think makes people feel bad, and I think it makes normal people feel bad, and I think it makes weird people like Adult to feel bad too, because of all the reasons that you described, right?
Hmm.
You know, you want that sort of that that back and forth to exist, and you want it to matter,
Yeah.
right? Like matter to the extent, you know,
Yeah.
it's always hard to say like, oh, what do you mean by matter? But I think if you play games in this meta, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
It's not even just power
Absolutely.
level. It's
Yeah.
like you look at the fundamentals, right? What did the previous meta have? Because the previous meta is in many ways similar to this one. It's a bunch of wild sets with one like main modern set, and this meta is kind of the same. But the previous had tempo manipulation, where you can do a lot of crazy stuff with tempo manipulation, and that did a lot. And you can do like 25% less of it here, if not even more or less. And the thing with tempo manipulation is tempo has to overwhelm to win the game, or else you still lose the game. So 25% less tempo manipulation is like 50% less effectiveness of tempo manipulation. And tempo manipulation is like freaking half of what a murder was about. So you're losing a lot there. And the other side of it was Skullomance. Skullomance was endless card advantage with basic cards. You don't have that anymore. And when you don't have a lot of card advantage, now how do you get card advantage? You get card advantage a lot of the times from your crazy cards or from just your absurdly big cards. And the stuff that you do to add these cards advantage, and you're gonna do crappy drafting, and you're gonna do crappy like playing in terms of your actions mattering, because you can't manipulate card advantage as much. You can't manipulate tempo as much. So you're losing a lot of the tools that you can apply skill to. And that's not to say that you can't apply skill. You can still bump Yetis, but bumping Yetis was always low EV in terms of impacting the game these days. So your effective value of how you impact the game with your skill and your strategy, whether through the draft or through the gameplay, has gone down. Like I'm not. I don't think I'm exaggerating here. I think from the previous meta, it has your skill impact on the game has gone down at least fourfold. Like 25% before this patch. This patch may have raised it a little bit after that. But before the patch, if you were a good player, your skill was at maybe 25% of how much your skill mattered in the previous meta. And now maybe it's bumped back up to 50% or something, like at most, given how much they've nerfed the really like bad pointless game cards. But it's a lot less. And the last meta I thought was a good meta, but you can't take a good meta and reduce it by 50% and have like an even okay meta. Like this is a terrible trashy meta, and it's boring. I just it's everything, right? Like if you're gonna have a total trash meta, at least have everybody be slinging random crap around. You know, like if the meta's gonna be this bad, it should at least be crazy. But it's got the worst of both worlds.
Yeah. Not great. Definitely not great. So it seems like we're going to be stuck here for a little bit, because I would be very shocked if, after a pretty sizable change, that they would
Mm-hmm.
change again. Um, but I certainly am not very, I mean, look, I'm just not very motivated to play Arena these days, period. But this does not do more to bring me back into it. Um, I think at this point, it's sort of like, we're trying to move a few pieces here and there, uh, but let's move more towards bigger structural
Mm-hmm.
changes if we can. Because it does seem like the modes team wants to do very subtle changes. I just don't think it's enough now. Because look, I understand. I'm not gonna cry about power creep and everything. You have to print cards that people want to play with. Cool cards, cool effects. Um, you can't take a step back in power level
Yes.
anymore.
No.
You can't. And I think that's absolutely correct. You know, it's correct. You got to sell a product. People's expectations have changed. You have to fit it with the old cards, right? In terms of power, like it has to be at least as good, if not better. And it probably should be better, right? It should be better. The new stuff should be better. Um, but then we can't do this anymore. Bringing back Ungoro, you're just like, even Ungoro, right? In
Yeah.
which the time in which Angoro came out, we're like, oh my gosh, like
Super power creep.
Vine Cleaver, Primordial Drake.
The amount of
Oh
times I
man.
raged at Primordial Drake, oh my god. And that's not to talk about
So
Tar Creeper, which was like the subtle best card ever, along with Fireplume Phoenix, which was a little less subtle, but like also best card ever status at the time.
yeah, so this is one of those things where um I think we just have to move more towards that because I
Yeah.
certainly appreciate what the Moats team have done and continue to do, but just at the point now where look, we're at the end, almost near the end of 2022. We're gonna get another set, right?
Yeah.
And then once we get into sets in 2023, you can just imagine how powerful they are. You can just look at these sets that are going to come back at a certain point. And okay, it's not just like, for example, if you say, okay, well, don't bring back some of these super old sets. The power level has
No.
risen very, very
Mm-hmm.
quickly in a very short period of time. And one of the problems is also with the increase in ways to discover certain cards, certain categories of cards, and with how good certain cards are from certain sets for particular classes. Whenever those are in, it's boom problematic,
Yeah.
boom problematic. So
And they're
that
always gonna
is
be in.
tough.
They're always
Yeah.
gonna be in. So you gotta bite the bullet and just go standard. You know, like it's gotta be standard half the time. You know what else is standard? Standard. Your main game mode is standard. So why can't Arena be standard? Like wild rotations in Arena. I know that's historically what it's been for a while, but it's also been standard for like a year. I think at some time in the middle there, and it was fine. Um, I think you have to treat wild metas, like truly wild metas, where there are as many, if not more, wild sets than standard sets. You think you have to treat them as event metas. Like you throw them in for 2 weeks. People have fun. You synergize with some of the old stuff. Like one of the things they did for this one is they really wanted to synergize with Rogue Secrets. So like every single Rogue Secret set in the past is here. Like cool, but don't make the rest of the game fun. um, so I don't know. There's no way to fix this. The way to fix it is at the rotation level. This is what Merce has been like, saying without saying directly. That is the only way to fix it. Unless you're making arena specific cards or curating specifically, you just put standard sets, standard or standard plus 1. Anything else is an event meta at this point. So yes, the previous meta it worked out. The dev team that selected the rotations, Matt London's team, that worked out great. But I think that's lightning striking. Like that was such a low odds. It blew me away that it worked, and I don't think it's going to happen with any frequency. So right now they're like 50-50. But I don't think they're going to even continue 50-50. I think if they're going to take 3 more stabs at it, they're going to succeed on average less than once. And we're all going to suffer whenever they keep trying this. So they gotta just mix in way more standard metas.
Yep. I think that's sort of where we're at. Like, it sounds bad because we certainly don't want to poo-poo and be like, "Oh, none of this worked." Um,
Like,
a lot of these were like it would have been a lot worse. Like throughout the past, I don't know, year or something, if they weren't as vigilant, if they
mm-hmm.
didn't do all these things, we're just at a point in which it is not enough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And this change, this update, it's a perfect update in my opinion. Like I could not have done a better. I mean, they probably could have boosted the classes on the bottom more, or nerfed the classes at the top more, so that the classes at the bottom feel less bad. Like they probably could have gone a little bit harder than they did, but like whatever, right? Like the directions are all good. What they did is all good. Everything is all good. I don't even mind that they didn't nerf Sylvanas yet. It's the new big bad. Like let it have its time to shine as S plus card. But it's just none of it matters. None of it matters for it, and so I don't know. People are saying maybe the Halloween event is going to come back and with dual classes, and I'm like, great,
I think that's
because
fine. Look,
what I do with dual classes, I stop playing arena, and I want to stop playing this. I'm not going to stop playing it yet, but it would not be like I'm not at the. I normally really like playing arena, but
yeah,
this meta is super bad.
I think that will be the best actually. Like if you want to take this seriously, I think you've seen enough, right? You've seen enough of the same old, same old. Bring back dual classes. That's fine. Like it'll be something new. If you want to grind that, grind that. I don't know. It's up to you. But it's something new. It can get people playing arena again. It's just something very different, right? Let stuff be busted. That's the entire
Yeah,
point of dual
yeah,
classes. Like, let stuff be busted from the
hmm
very beginning
yeah.
when they first introduced this, and we're like, Hunter's Mark with Mage Hero power? What? That's crazy. I don't know, we thought that was like the craziest thing ever. And now there are some
Well, keep
real
in mind,
crazy
Hunter's
shit.
Mark was 0 mana back then. So that
Uh,
was a 2 mana hard removal, basically.
I think at that point
Oh, it was already one? Oh,
it
so
was
a
already one,
3 mana
and
hard
then
removal?
it came to, and it was like, and then it disappeared, right?
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. So yeah, that kept on getting nerfed and nerfed. But yes, so bring that back.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely fine.
Yeah. Like at this point, there's just nothing you can do to save the meta. Well, unless you're doing a mid meta rotation change before the next set comes out, but otherwise we're just kind of just waiting for the next set to come out. I see someone say this in chat. I guess I haven't been keeping up in the news, but apparently they're releasing a new class next set. Like what? I did not hear this, but that would be awesome. If we get, I don't know, Monk or whatever the next class is at Death Knight. They've already done Death Knight. I feel like they would just skip Death Knight and go to Monk. But we'll see. Oh, Death Knights. Oh, it's going to be Death Knights getting super leaked. Interesting. But yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. It's always fun to add a new class in. As much as we hate Demon Hunters, I think it's Demon Hunters have added a lot to the arena. Like I wouldn't want the arena to exist without Demon Hunters, even though it was a very painful balancing period. Hopefully, with this new release, they'll just be quicker at the balancing. Okay, cool.
Hopefully so.
That's
Cool.
that's it for us today. We wanted to make this quick. Oh, I'm gonna drop 2 more lines about people who actually want to play in this meta because we haven't really like normally we go like a little more granular. If you are playing in this meta, the first thing I noticed on the first day, and it's been true throughout, is that there are fewer threes. There's actually fewer curve cards, period, but threes are especially hit, and the ones that exist are all bad. With twos and fours as well. So you got to make sure you get your curve because the mid-tier cards don't matter, right? Like it's all about the really big cards and then your normal cards. So the normal cards, whether you have a curve or not, matters way more than what those cards are. So you do want to still have a curve, and the 3 is a very important part of the curve. So get that, and that's the biggest advice for you. Not because it'll help you win games, but because if you don't do it, you're going to lose the Yeti bumping into Yeti games like a lot. And you gotta win those games because you're not winning the games when your opponent whips out a big card and your big card is in your deck and you don't draw it, or you don't even have one in your deck.
All right. That's it.
Cool. Until next week, then. This is Abukta.
This is Merp. See you guys.